This episode of Dot Femme contains sensitive language and details around the 1998 hate crime and murder of Matthew Shepard. Content warnings and timestamps have been included in the episode description. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to Dot Femme.
No funny lead into this episode, Claire.
Why?
Because we're talking about a pretty serious topic, pretty serious event. You know, the thing about doing a history podcast is that, you know, some parts of history are kind of ugly.
Yeah, this is a bad one. This one was hard to read. I was reading the show notes and there's some pretty... Yeah. There's this graphic. It's graphic. It's really graphic.
Yeah, there are some very graphic moments. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get through this without getting angry and potentially yelling or, you know, crying at times. So this might be a rough one, but we can't just not talk about the ugly parts of history.
No, not everything is rainbows and butterflies.
Yeah, to do so would be a disservice. And, you know, this is a case that I remember when it happened in 1998. And I was 8 years old when this happened. And, you know, so I obviously hadn't come out as trans and all that. But I do distinctly remember seeing this on like the national news. And I remember my parents were horrified.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, it was a really big deal. So like I knew a little bit about this case. And a few years ago is when I watched a couple documentaries about Matthew Shepard and learned a lot more about the case. And it was absolutely, it was gut wrenching.
Yeah.
You know, it's I've in interviews and in these documentaries, people have described it as, you know, their soul aching. And I think that's a really good description. That's definitely kind of how it feels at times.
Yeah.
So this is a story that I really care about, and I really want to, you know, do Matthew and Matthew's parents and his story justice. And we can't do that effectively if we gloss over certain things. So this is going to be a pretty graphic, a pretty upsetting episode, but I think it's very important to talk about this. So without further ado, welcome to this episode of Dot Femme about Matthew Shepard. I'm your host, Danielle Gonzalez.
I'm Claire.
And we're just going to jump right into it. So, Claire, how much do you know about Matthew Shepard prior to preparing for this episode?
His name was something that I remembered. And like you, I remember my parents talking about Matthew when I was young. But I really didn't know why or who he was. So I'm going into this one a little blind. But again, like I said earlier, he was a household name. I just didn't really know why. So As I was reading the show notes, it's unfortunate now that I know why.
All right. Well, let's start with who Matthew Shepard was. So Matthew Shepard was born on December 1st, 1976 to Judy and Dennis Shepard in Casper, Wyoming. He's a Wyoming boy, Wyoming kid.
Way up there.
Really, you know,
farm country.
If you see pictures of Matthew, he's this very, you know, he's just all American, you know, blonde haired boy, very handsome, you know, and
he's cute.
He grew up in Wyoming. He was a huge fan of the outdoors. He went camping with his dad a lot and his younger brother, you know. But when Matt was about 8 years old, his parents began to wonder if he might be gay. His mom, Judy, often tells a story about how Matt's favorite Halloween costume as a kid was Dolly Parton.
Nice.
You know, so like she's always like, maybe that was a clue. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
maybe
it was.
Yeah, but Matt came from a supportive family. His dad, Dennis, said that, you know, no matter what, they were supportive. They just wanted Matt to be happy because regardless, Matt was their son.
Yeah, they went to the ends of the earth for Matt and what happened. So like that statement is definitely backed up. And sometimes I hear that statement and I'm like, but how much were you? And they really were. Like, you're gonna find
Yeah.
out later in this episode that like they really went to the ends of the earth.
Yeah, Judy especially. So after Matt's sophomore year of high school, Dennis got a job with an oil company in Saudi Arabia. So they moved to the Middle East to an Aramco base.
What's an Aramco base? Is it like a military base, but for oil, like, company
kind of
people?
Yeah, kind of. I believe Aramco is a Saudi-owned oil company.
Yeah.
And they have, like company-based towns that are designed to look like, small town, middle America kind of thing. While they were in Saudi Arabia, there was no like American high school for Matt to finish high school in Saudi Arabia. So instead he went to an American school in Switzerland called the American School in Switzerland, I guess, or nicknamed Tassus. Okay. And Matt finished his junior and senior year at Tassus in Switzerland. And this is a really rich experience for him.
I was just thinking, like, this does not sound cheap either. So like, he seems to come from privilege. Like,
well, not really, though. I mean, kind of. His family was like, middle class, probably slightly more well-to-do middle class, but like the school was paid for by, oil company. It was like part of his dad's job benefits and stuff like that. Yeah. So I don't think they came from too much wealth. In fact, Matthew, he was really good at making friends and just being friendly. He liked to meet people. And I often heard from folks, especially, classmates from Tassus, who asked him, are you like some rich kid being able to go to a boarding school in Switzerland? And he was like, no, I'm from small town Wyoming. My dad works for an oil company in Saudi Arabia, and that's how I'm able to be here.
Yeah, I looked him up. So his dad was just an oil industry safety engineer. Yeah, so definitely blue collar.
And apparently there were a couple of other classmates who also, had parents that worked for Aramco in Saudi Arabia. And I guess one of Matt's best friends at Tassus, her father also worked at the same Aramco base. And I guess their families were like neighbors in Saudi Arabia. But these two kids were in Switzerland at school. So Matthew's very personal. He really loved meeting new people, making a lot of friends. In both high schools he went to back in Wyoming and also in Tassus in Switzerland, he was elected by his classmates to be kind of a peer counselor for people because, he was really easy to talk to. He was a great listener. He was a fierce advocate for everyone to be accepted, as you would expect from someone who is struggling with his own identity and just wants to be accepted as well.
Sounds like he's a leader of sorts, a little
absolutely. He had a lot of friends. He was really involved in the theater department, really loved acting in high school. And he also really developed this love of traveling. He and his friends would frequently take weekend trips, to various places across Europe, Venice and Amsterdam and wherever. So he really got to kind of meet a lot of new people and experience new cultures. And it really created this, love of traveling and helping people.
Yeah. And once you're there in Switzerland, traveling to Europe is much easier.
Traveling through Europe. Yeah.
So,
100%. So it's, I think for us in the States to think like going to a new country for a weekend trip, that's crazy.
Exactly.
Like all the countries in Europe are so small that it's very easy to do that. You can make a weekend trip to like Liechtenstein or wherever.
Yeah.
So
and boarding school, there's a lot of freedom that he has, there's a lot of, there's a lot of independence that he's already, achieving at this. And so, I'm sure that the decisions he's making aren't necessarily the best, but,
he's a teenager. What teenager makes the best decisions?
That's what I was going to say. He's a teenager. He's high on life. Like, he's got everything in place now. He's showing promise. He's got a lot of prospects ahead of him.
Yeah. I mean, it seemed like in high school he was really coming into his own. He was finding what he was passionate about, what he loved, and making a lot of friends. He was very politically interested, always reading the newspaper in the library. He frequently said he wanted to study politics. and foreign relations. He wanted to be a diplomat, and he was going to change the world, is what he told friends. Yeah. He's really kind of flourishing. But in 1995, his senior year, he and his friends traveled to Morocco for a weekend. And, you know, now we think of Morocco as like a tourist destination, totally. A great place for a vacation. But in 1995, it was not considered the safest place.
Interesting.
It was, you know, it just didn't have that touristy reputation. So while he was there, Matt was abducted, robbed, and raped by a group of local Moroccan men. They pulled him right off the street through some back alleys. They, you know, stripped his clothes off, took his money, and sexually assaulted him. Jesus. And then left him there.
He's definitely a strong person, you know, to be in this position where, you know, where like there's two instances in his life where he got himself into this trouble or people took advantage of him. Like, you know, to me that says that like he didn't back down. He didn't say like, you know, yes, he like stood on his ground. He was really strong. He stuck to his convictions. And you know, people just took advantage. You know, they saw this, you know, really tiny, you know, wily person who maybe was a little too big for his britches at that time at 18 years old. And
to be clear, we don't know exactly why he was targeted. You know, some of his friends think that maybe it was because he was gay, because, you know, in another country where no one knows you and you're, you know, kind of able to be a little bit more yourself without worrying about it getting back to someone you know. So maybe he was exploring his sexuality a bit more openly. I don't know if I necessarily believe that. I mean, it's certainly possible, but I think it's also equally possible that he just looked like a wealthy young tourist.
That's true too.
So we don't know exactly why that happened, but ultimately it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is he was assaulted
and then
in
he
Morocco.
Came back and dealt with
he was deeply changed.
Immense depression.
Yeah, his friends and family say that it was like a switch flipped. As soon as he came back from Morocco, he seemed shattered. His passion for life and living was not there anymore. His mom, in an interview, described it like prior to Morocco, he was always kind of the center of attention, life of the party, very confident, always walked with his head held high and smiling. And after Morocco, he took kind of a victim's posture. He shuffled around a lot, hunched over, always looking at the ground, smiling very rarely, you know. And this is the kind of thing you see in a lot of sexual assault survivors. So it's, you know, this is a very, you know, shattering moment for Matthew. And I think, and a lot of people think that this really shattered his sense of safety. And, you know, that was a big part of what would happen next.
I mean, you know, Dany paints the picture, you know, this whole time of someone who's high on life, right? Traveling, having a great time, you know, with friends, with, you know, living on their own, being highly independent. You know, I mean, the person has huge aspirations, a diplomat, you know, like I don't know
wants
of any
to just help people.
Yeah, exactly. Wants to just help people. And people just take advantage of people like that.
Yeah.
And it's disheartening. And to me, after this moment, you know, Matt got a really violent and ugly taste of the real world.
Yeah.
And like at 18 years old, 19 maybe, you know, he clearly, it's just like, he just wasn't the same. He came out a different person.
And who would be, you know? No person deserves to experience, you know, what he experienced in Morocco in 95. After the assault, he, you know, made his way back to where his classmates were staying at, I think it was like a hostel or a hotel or something. And he told a couple of his closest friends what had just happened to him. They reported it to local police, but, you know, there was no real evidence to figure out who had committed this assault. So I don't think anything came of that. And they reported it up to like the school's faculty who I think they kind of immediately suspended the trip. They flew everyone back to campus in Switzerland. And Matt's parents were called. And I don't know if both of them were able to make it, but at the very least, Judy, his mom, made it from Saudi Arabia to see Matt and comfort him. And they essentially, Matt was so traumatized, so impacted by this that they essentially pulled him out of school, took him back to Saudi Arabia. He finished the remainder of his senior year at home, essentially, and then flew back to Switzerland for the graduation ceremony. Wow. So it was a pretty big impact. And then after high school, I think Matt struggled a little bit trying to figure out what he wanted to do. As, anyone who experiences such a life-altering trauma, kind of sometimes you feel kind of listless and you don't know what to do next. But eventually, Matt decides that he does want to continue his education. So he
stuck with his convictions and studied
he
political
goes back
science.
To college.
Yep.
He goes to college, which, ultimately takes him back to Wyoming, to his hometown of Casper. And he takes some classes at Casper on political science, foreign relations. He continues his study of, foreign languages that he had started in high school in Switzerland. And then eventually he transfers to the University of Wyoming in Laramie, which is where the rest of this story unfolds. Hey, y'all. It's Dany from the editing booth. Normally, right about now, there'd be like a Patreon ad asking you to support us, but this episode's a bit different. If Matt's story has impacted you or made an impression, I'd like to ask you to consider supporting the Matthew Shepard Foundation and the great work they do instead. You can find a link to donate in the episode description. Now, back to the episode. College was kind of a time of, it was definitely challenging, like it is for everybody, but it was also a time of a little bit of healing and confidence building. Matt came out publicly as gay, and he became very involved in the university's LGBTQ&A group and helped, plan Gay Pride Month and all, that kind of stuff. So, he was definitely finding his confidence, still struggling with manic depression. Yeah. Of course, he had high days and low days, but he was finding his support group. He had a group of friends. He was able to be himself. And Laramie is a college town. So while Wyoming itself is, I think it still is, and it definitely was in 1998, the most conservative state in the Union, Laramie itself was kind of a liberal bastion because of, the college and the young kids and everything. It's, as anyone who goes to a college town in a red state like I did, that it's still not safe, but there are pockets where it is safer, right? Yeah. And that's kind of how Laramie was. So Matt was beginning to feel safe again. That's good. He wrote a lot of letters back to his parents, who were still in Saudi Arabia at this time, saying that he was, at times his letters described still dealing with depression. At other times, his letters sounded really great. He described, beginning to feel safe again, feeling really confident and having friends to go out on the town, feeling, cute and really just starting to enjoy life again. And then we get to October of 1998.
He's 22.
Not yet. He's 21. He's about to turn 22.
Yeah, he's about to turn 22. Yeah.
He would turn 22 December 1st of 1998. But as anyone who knows where this story is going, he never gets to make it to his 22nd birthday. For anyone that's gotten this far and has missed it, there are timestamps with content warnings in the description, but I'm going to give you a warning right now. This is where the story starts to get bad.
Oh, yeah.
On the evening of October 6, 1998, Matt goes to a bar that he knows and frequents, fairly regularly, called the Fireside Bar. It's not a gay bar, but it is known to the gay college community. Sometimes folks hang out there. But most importantly, it was a bar where Matt felt safe. He felt comfortable. He had struck up a friendship with the bartender, like a casual friendship, the same way that I've struck up friendships with bartenders that I only see at the bar.
Yep, exactly.
And this bartender, described Matthew as, a quiet but very personable, friendly, happy to socialize kind of kid. He preferred to come in on, the more quiet evenings. And the beginning of the evening on October 6th was exactly that. It was quiet.
Yeah.
So Matt goes to the fireside. It starts to get a little bit busier. A couple of guys come in and Matt starts talking to these guys. They're over by the pool tables. They're chatting. A few hours later, Matt's been at the bar for a couple hours talking with these guys. So shortly after midnight, these two men named Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson offer to give Matt a ride home. And Matt agrees to go with them.
Like you do.
And so they leave the bar and they get in Aaron McKinney's truck and they start driving. And while they're driving, they begin to beat Matthew, punching him in the car. They demand his wallet. Matthew, of course, complies, gives them his wallet, but they continue beating him. He's begging for them to stop, to let him out. And they drive about a mile outside of Laramie to a wide open field where they come up on a split rail fence, which is, one of those log fences where the log has been split into smaller, they're called rails.
Yeah.
And, they're propped up. They're mostly, kind of landscaping or decorative these days, or to line the edges of a property parcel. But they drive up to a split rail fence. They drag Matt out of the truck, who is at this point, crying, begging for his life. He's attempting to resist as best he can. But again, Matt he's pretty small and thin, and he's not super strong. So there's not a ton he can do.
I would like to, try to sit with that for a moment and try to think of him as this incredibly strong and resilient person, and not the person who, was in this immense fear.
Well, I think there are ways that you can both be terrified and resilient. And I think this story demonstrates that.
So it is cold right now. It is autumn. It is freezing.
Yeah, it's pretty chilly in Wyoming, early October. It's not warm, So they pull up to the split rail fence in the middle of a field about a mile outside of Laramie. They have already been beating him in the car. They drag him out of the truck. They drag him to the fence. They tie him to the fence with his hands behind him. And then Aaron McKinney takes a revolver out of his, waistband and begins beating Matt in the head with the butt of the pistol repeatedly, over and over and over, for maybe a good 15, 20 minutes. And Matthew was so severely beaten that his face was completely swollen. He was barely recognizable. His head was completely covered in blood down to about the middle of his chest. The only skin that was not covered in blood when he was found were streaks on his cheeks where... So the only skin not covered in blood were streaks on his cheeks where his tears had washed the blood away. Ooh, this is going to be a hard one to get through.
You got it.
He suffered skull fractures to the back of his head, in front of his right ear. There were a dozen or so small lacerations around his head, face, and neck. And ultimately, the injury that killed him was one of the blows to his head damaged his brainstem so severely that his body had trouble regulating vital functions like his breathing, his heart rate, and most importantly, his body temperature. So really, really brutal. Matthew was left there. Aaron and Russell drove away, leaving him tied to this fence, brutally beaten, bleeding, and Matthew remained there for 18 hours. He wasn't found until about 6 p.m. the next day, where a passing bicyclist, a mountain biker who was a student at, University of Wyoming, Laramie, was passing by, saw what he thought was a Halloween decoration, a scarecrow, by this fence, which was kind of odd because this was out in the middle of nowhere. Who would see a Halloween decoration? So he approached to investigate when he realized it was a person. He called the police, who came out to find Matthew, and he was cut from the fence. The responding officer, she tried to clear his airway, tried to get him breathing stronger because he was breathing very shallowly, but he was not conscious. He was alive barely, but he wasn't conscious. Matthew was immediately rushed to Ivinson Memorial Hospital in Laramie. But they're a small hospital.
His injuries were too severe.
His injuries were way too severe for this small hospital to be able to take care of him. So they transported him quickly to a larger hospital that had, a head trauma ward in Colorado, where Matt remained on life support in a comatose state for multiple days. His parents, again, were still in Saudi Arabia when this happened. So, as soon as he's found by the police, his parents are contacted. They immediately start the process of getting back to the US. And when they arrive to see Matthew at the hospital, Matt's dad describes it as the most gruesome and heartbreaking thing he's ever seen. His mother says that she couldn't even recognize him at first. It was only when she got closer and saw that one of his eyes was open very slightly that she could see the blue color of his eyes, and a corner of his mouth was so swollen that it was open slightly, and she could see his braces, that she knew it was Matthew. So he remained on life support to, see if he would pull through this. And I don't think anyone had an expectation that Matthew would ever wake up again. If he woke up again at all, which was exceedingly unlikely, he would have been so brain damaged that he would have, been a completely different person. Yeah. So the decision was being considered whether or not to pull Matthew off of life support, which, I can't even imagine being a parent having to make that call. Yeah. While they were just discussing whether to pull him from life support, Matthew's blood pressure began to drop and his condition deteriorated pretty rapidly. And shortly after midnight on October 12th, about 6 days after he was attacked, Matt died. And he died at the age of 21, having never regained consciousness. At this point, Matt's story is national news. All across the country are headlines. People are holding candlelight vigils, praying for him to pull through. I think everyone in the world loves an underdog story, but here in America, we love underdog stories. I think people were really hoping that this underdog was going to survive and pull through and come out of it. So when he passed, the hospital they gave a press release and made a formal announcement. And at that announcement, the hospital director, who was addressing the press, said that Matt's mother had asked them to pass a message along to everyone where she urged parents to hug their children and tell them that they love them. Absolutely gut-wrenching. A few days later at Matt's funeral, the Westboro Baptist Church shows up to protest Matt's funeral. And, as someone from Kansas, I feel like I constantly have to apologize for Westboro Baptist Church, that they came from my home state.
God, so bad.
Fred Phelps, I take a little bit of solace knowing that Fred Phelps is burning in hell, if you believe such things.
They were there. They were at the funeral like they always are. And they had homophobic signs. They've got, God hates fags, Matt's in hell. All the bullshit that goes along with the Westboro Church.
I just imagine what Matt's family has to go through. Not only are they having to bury a child after such a horrific event, but then to have people who never met Matt.
Just wanted to help people.
And they hate him so much that they're praising his death outside the funeral. It's abhorrent, and I am in awe at the strength of the Shepards, specifically for what happens next.
How many months after this whole thing do we actually can't say it How many months after the murder do we get to the trial? How long does it take from him to go from murder to the trial?
First, let's talk about what happened right after the murder.
Sure.
So after torturing and leaving Matt for dead, McKinney and Henderson drive back to town where I don't know what it was. I don't know if they were, classic Warcraft ogre bloodlust, something going on, but they pick a fight with a couple of men.
What?
Yeah, they pick a fight with a couple of guys.
They just killed someone and then they go back. What?
Exactly.
Fucking hell. I hate these two.
Yeah. They drive back to town. They pick a fight with a couple of young guys, an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old. And, kind of ironically, and...
Do they get their ass beat? Tell me.
They do.
Yeah.
They do get their ass beat. In fact, Aaron McKinney ends up in the hospital with a head wound. But yeah, they pick a fight and they get their ass beat. Now, immediately after picking the fight, they, are sitting in McKinney's truck on a quiet residential street. And this is, 2, 3 in the morning. So it's like no one's out. And it just so happens that nearby, the police get a call from a homeowner who has just had his tires slashed. So the police go out to investigate this, vandalism. And the reporting officer, Flint Waters, is driving around the neighborhood, just trying to look for people out of place. If someone, committed vandalism, they might still be in the area. And he comes across McKinney and Henderson sitting in McKinney's truck, which is weird.
Yep.
They're just kind of loitering. It's the middle of the night. No one else is really out. So he thinks, these guys might be
as you do,
the ones who did the vandalism.
Suspicion.
So, he pulls up to them, tells them who he is, what he's doing, and he notices that these two are kind of bloody, as he describes it, a considerable amount of blood they were covered in. And he starts to question Russell Henderson about the blood and about their injuries. And, Russell tells this crazy and confusing story about being jumped by white guy and a Hispanic guy, which, sounds like it might possibly be partially true, but it doesn't seem to explain the level of injuries and the amount of blood that they're covered in. So the police do a pretty quick search of McKinney's vehicle using the plain view doctrine. And in doing that, they find a blood smeared pistol, which was the weapon that they used to beat Matt.
Yeah.
They find Matt's shoes, which is strange because they were very nice, polished shoes, something that it doesn't look like McKinney or Henderson would wear. So why are these shoes here? And most importantly, they find Matthew Shepard's credit card on the dashboard.
Yeah.
So
Got him.
McKinney and Henderson are arrested. They're taken in. They're questioned. Now, initially, they're really just kind of being questioned for the fight that they had and all of this kind of stuff. But after Matthew Shepard is found the following day, because his credit card was in their truck,
it all makes sense.
They are charged with attempted murder and kidnapping and aggravated robbery. Now, McKinney and Henderson's girlfriends are also charged with accessories after the fact.
Wow.
And we learn some very interesting things from the girlfriend's deposition and interview by the police. One of them tells a story of how the guys came home and one of them, climbs in through the window covered in blood and says, "I think I just killed someone tonight." The four get together and try to get their story straight. They decide they need to, get rid of whatever evidence they can, including, some of the blood-stained clothes that they're covered in. So they originally try to burn some of these clothes, but it's too cold out. They can't get a fire started. So instead, I don't know if all four of them did or if it was just the girls but apparently someone takes this bag of clothes and they drive out to Cheyenne, Wyoming and throw it in a dumpster.
Yeah.
And then they try to, get this false alibi together. While the police are interviewing Russell Henderson and Aaron McKinney, they specifically they start to ask details about what happened to Matt. And, McKinney tells this story of they offered to give Matt a ride back to his home. And while they were driving, Matt starts to make sexual advances, grabbing his thigh, and this enrages him. So he starts beating Matt in the truck, and that, I don't know. I don't buy that. And I'm not sure the police did either. So later the story changes. Well, they saw him at the bar. He looked a little gay and he looked like he had money. So the whole plan was that McKinney and Henderson would pretend to be gay to lure him out of the bar so that they could rob him. And that sounds a little closer to the truth.
Wow.
To me. Then there becomes this question, it's like, was it a robbery gone wrong? Now, I don't fucking buy that. And this is where I start to get a little pissed, because here's the fucking deal. If it's a robbery gone wrong, I can understand shooting someone. They have a gun. I can understand if the robbery goes wrong, you panic and you shoot someone. What I don't understand is beating someone repeatedly for an extended period of time, tying him to a fence in the middle of nowhere and leaving him there. Yeah. That's not a robbery gone wrong.
No.
That's hatred.
Yeah.
Is what that is.
Yep.
Ultimately, Henderson and the girls pled guilty.
Okay.
Henderson specifically pled guilty and agreed to testify against McKinney in return for a consecutive double life sentence as opposed to the death sentence. McKinney is pleading not guilty. And on the first day of trial, his defense attorney tried to use the gay panic defense in court. And the judge hears that and says, you're not allowed to use that argument in this case. There's no fucking way. So the defense is not allowed to use the gay panic defense. Thank Christ.
Yep.
So instead, they tried to make the argument that it was a robbery gone wrong. And when that doesn't look like it's working for the jury, then they say that, okay, McKinney did beat Matt and leave him for dead, but it wasn't because he was gay. It's because McKinney was sexually abused when he was younger. So when Matt came on to him, it triggered this, trauma response.
Oh, because that makes
enraged
killing
him.
someone right.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Trauma responses are real. I have friends who are, former military and have PTSD. But I have never seen a trauma response drive someone to murder. Yep. So that's horseshit. Yep. And furthermore, if you're going to pretend to be gay to lure someone to rob them, you can't be fucking surprised when they assume you're gay and try to flirt with you. Full fucking stop.
Yeah. The thing is that their conversation that night leads to them, seemingly having a cordial conversation of, hey, yeah, you want to ride home? Yeah, cool. Sounds good to me. That motion, has happened to hundreds of thousands of people night after night after night. And, whether or not it was, advancing on one of these guys, even making a suggestive comment, the reasonable response is saying, hey, man, you know what? Actually, why don't you just walk home? That's a reasonable response. Not great, but reasonable. The fact that they tied him up, the fact that they literally put this guy and beat him senseless.
Tortured him,
left him to die is hatred.
So if being hit on when you don't want it is a justification for being shocked and driven to murder, ladies, I guess it's free fucking game.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's such a ridiculous defense. It's absolutely insane. Women aren't allowed to murder men who hit on them unwanted.
God damn it.
And that happens every fucking night.
Every night.
Gay panic defense, absolute bullshit. Stupid. So needless to say, McKinney is convicted of felony murder and he's facing the death penalty in Wyoming. Now, I don't think we've ever talked about this on the podcast. I don't know why we would. I don't think it's ever come up, but I know you and I have talked about this. But my personal view on the death penalty, I don't think capital punishment has any place in a modern society. The only possible reasons I can see for capital punishment is to permanently remove someone from society to make sure that they can't hurt anyone again. And I don't think you need to kill them to do that in the modern age. I think you can imprison them for life. You do not have to grant them parole. So I don't think that's a valid justification for capital punishment. And the only other reason I can see is for vengeance. And I don't think that the state has any business being involved in vengeance and revenge.
Yeah.
In my mind, I don't think there is any justification for the death penalty in any possible case in the modern age. All that being said, this case really challenges me on that belief. But Judy and Dennis Shepard were supporters of capital punishment. They supported the death penalty. And I think early on in the trial, they wanted McKinney to face the death penalty.
Yeah.
Now, as the jury is deliberating on whether or not to suggest the death penalty for the judge, the Shepards approach the prosecution and decide that they're going to withdraw capital punishment and instead recommend life in prison for Aaron McKinney. They take the death penalty off the table.
Okay.
In the sentencing hearing, Dennis Shepard gives an incredibly moving and powerful statement. And there's a part of it that hits me so hard where he addresses Aaron McKinney directly. And he says, "Mr. McKinney, you robbed me of something very precious. Mr. McKinney, I give you life in the memory of one who no longer lives. I hope you live a long life and thank Matthew every day for it."
Wow.
Because the Shepards, while they want the death penalty and they believe in capital punishment, they know that that would not be the right tribute to Matt's life because that's not who Matt was. So they offer mercy to someone who showed no mercy. And I find that very powerful. That is a strength of will and character I cannot begin to fathom, that I can only hope to emulate a small percentage of it. I am just in awe of the strength that Judy and Dennis Shepard have. So immediately following Matt's murder, requests across the country for hate crime legislation are, pouring in. There had already been requests for hate crime legislation because lynching was still a thing. In fact, the same year that Matt died, a black man named James Byrd Jr. was lynched and killed by a couple of white supremacists.
People are so evil. What compels someone to do this? It's just hatred.
Let's get into philosophy a little bit.
Oh boy. All right, viewer, buckle in.
I grew up in a Catholic household. I went to Catholic school my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So, I grew up in this environment that had this concept of like a supernatural universal power that is evil, right?
Sure.
And that sometimes it drives people and it takes them over. I don't buy that. I don't think there's any such thing as supernatural evil. I think true evil is a choice people make.
Yeah.
And if you want to see what evil looks like, if you want to see the face of evil, you need only look at this story. Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson chose to do evil. They were not possessed by a demon. They were not influenced by Satan whispering in their ear. They were not controlled and manipulated by some cosmic, eldritch, evil force. They chose to do it.
Oh, yeah.
That's my take on evil. Why do people choose this? I don't know. It's, hate is a learned behavior. No one is born evil. No one is born with hate in their heart. It is a behavior that is learned. It is taught to them.
It is.
And McKinney and Henderson learned homophobia and hate somewhere, whether that's from their parents, whether it was from their church, whether it was from their classmates, who knows? But they learned it somewhere and they chose it on that night in October.
And, shortly after this murder, the state legislature voted on a bill that expanded hate crime legislation to include attacks motivated by a victim's sexual orientation. You know what, Dany?
It failed.
It failed! Of course it did!
It failed in a tie. It was a 30-30 tie. I mean, that happened right after this happened. I don't know if Wyoming has voted on a new piece of legislation afterward.
I hope so. It is Wyoming.
I get that Wyoming state legislature is a bunch of old former white ranchers. I get that. But it's a human thing to see a child like this. Matthew Shepard was like an all-American kid. He could have been anyone's kid, anybody's kid. I think that's why it affected the nation so strongly.
Deep breaths, Dany.
But like we said, even before Matt died, people had been trying to get hate crime legislation passed, but it wouldn't be for another 7 years that another hate crime legislation would be introduced.
Yeah, let's go.
This time it was more comprehensive. It was titled the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act.
Okay.
It was introduced as a bipartisan piece of legislature sponsored by Representative John Conyers and more than 170 co-sponsors. So like, people were pretty overwhelmingly in favor of getting this thing passed. It was going to amend and expand the existing hate crimes definition to cover gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability.
All in.
It would, require reporting by the FBI of those crimes. And most importantly, like, this represented the culmination of a very fierce decade of queer activism and advocacy by Matt's parents, and especially Judy.
Matt's mom.
In 1999, right after the murder, Judy formed the Matthew Shepard Foundation. Excellent. So her whole life became consumed by this, case, by the foundation and going to court in the immediate aftermath, and then speaking in front of Congress for trying to get this legislation passed. And finally, in 2007, they got this piece introduced.
Hey.
And, the Shepards were in attendance at the introduction ceremony when it was read on the floor of Congress before a vote.
Cool.
And it passed both the House and Senate.
Go.
But
no,
it was attached to a renewal of the Authorization of Defense Act. And President Bush said that he would veto it if this hate crimes legislation was still attached when it reached his desk.
Clear hatred, people. Just keep it in the damn bill. Oh, my God.
At this time, we were in the middle of a war. This Defense Act had to be passed, so they pulled the hate crime legislation out. And that was, that was a pretty big blow to the families of both Matt Shepard and James Byrd. But they continued to reintroduce this bill into Congress.
Let's go.
Year after year.
Getting momentum again.
And it continued to be passed, but never quite made it to the president's desk.
Oh, keep it going.
Until finally, on October 28th, 2009, 11 years after Matt's murder, President Obama signed the legislation into law.
Thanks, Obama.
With Matt's family in attendance standing behind the president. So we finally got national hate crime legislation that protects gay folks and trans folks because of Matthew Shepard and his story. Matt wanted to change the world. He wanted to help people. And it may not be the way that Matt wanted to do it. It may not be the way that Matt's family wanted him to do it. But in the end, Matt did exactly that. He changed things and he helped people. Yes, he continues to help people.
Yes, he does.
Matt has a great legacy.
I mean, it was only 2009, that's over 10 years. Over 10 years it took to just sign this bill. Yeah.
So in October of 2018, just after the 20th anniversary of his death, Matt's ashes were interred at the crypt of Washington National Cathedral in a ceremony that was presided over by the first openly gay Episcopal Bishop, Gene Robinson. It was a beautiful ceremony. It's the first time that a national figure that was not like a politician or public servant whose ashes were interred at the cathedral. I think the last one before Matt was more than 50 years prior. It was Helen Keller. So, a really distinctive honor, and one very deserved, I think.
Yeah.
Following year in June, for the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, Matt was among the 50 inaugural Pioneers, Trailblazers, and Heroes inducted on the National LGBTQ Wall of Honor at the Stonewall National Monument, next to names like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera,
Lou Sullivan, Alfred Kinsey, June Jordan, Christine Jorgensen. There's so many names on this. It's awesome.
So he had a very turbulent life, but he took it head on, I think. And hard as it was, he found those, those points of love and light. And, he did what he set out to do. He changed the world. He helped people. So that's the story of Matthew Shepard. I don't have a witty sign-off for this one. So
I don't know if the story needs a witty sign-off, Dany.
I don't think it does. I'd like to point to a couple resources here. Okay. So obviously the Matthew Shepard Foundation, founded by Matt's parents, Judy and Dennis, and I believe Matt's brother Dylan works there currently. So if you can, donate to them. There's no Patreon plug for us for this episode. That doesn't feel right. So instead, support the Matthew Shepard Foundation.
That's right.
I'd also like to recommend, there's an indie documentary called Matt Shepard Was My Friend. It was created 15 years after Matt's murder by a friend of Matthew, a classmate he had that he met in Switzerland.
There's an HBO documentary as well.
Yeah, there's an HBO documentary that I watched as part of my research for this called Matthew Shepard, An American Hate Crime. It was made in 2023.
Yeah. Wow, that's recent.
It's free on HBO Max for anyone that subscribes to HBO Max. We're not sponsored by them, I wish. But yeah, definitely check that out if you can. It's very good. The end of the documentary kind of ties it back to this current age and how, a lot of the hard-won victories that we had in the early 2000s were on the shoulders of Matt Shepard and this hate crime legislation. Very relevant now more than ever, I think. And that's part of why I really wanted to tell his story and try and do him justice in this episode today, because I do think that it is so relevant. It is so needed to know his story. Finally, to quote Leslie Newman, I would like to extend this question to all of our listeners. What can you do in Matt's memory in order to make a difference? So think about that one. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll catch you in the next episode.
Bye.